when Emily Sanders' body was pulled from the murky Texas Bayou and just days later David Collins vanished without a trace, the town realized a merciless killer was hiding among them, striking again and again while no one knew who would be next. The early morning fog hung heavy over the Texas Bayou, curling around the trees and swallowing the narrow dirt roads that led into the heart of the swamp. The town nearby was still asleep, unaware of the danger that had silently crept closer. For weeks, rumors had circulated about missing women, whispered by those who feared speaking too loudly. Most dismissed the talk as exaggeration, the kind of stories small towns told themselves to explain the unexplainable. But that morning, the silence was broken in the most horrifying way. A local fisherman, navigating the shallow waters for his morning catch, noticed something unusual tangled among the reeds. At first, he thought it was debris, driftwood twisted by the current. As he drew closer, a horrifying realization struck him. It was a body floating just beneath the water's surface, limp and lifeless. Panic gripped him as he reached the shore to call the authorities. Within minutes, law enforcement arrived, their vehicles crunching on the gravel, lights cutting through the lingering mist. The officers moved quickly, dragging the body from the bayou and laying it on the muddy bank. It was a young woman, her features pale and cold, her clothing damp and torn. Signs of foul play were obvious, her hands bound, faint bruising along her neck. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Families huddled in their homes, locking doors that had always been left open. Shops delayed opening, and the usual chatter in the streets was replaced by hushed, nervous voices. People stared at each other with suspicion, wondering if someone they knew could commit such a crime. The sheriff called in detectives from the county, hoping that fresh eyes might uncover something the local officers had missed. As the investigators combed the area, they noted the methodical placement of the body, the way the bayou seemed to have swallowed its secrets before releasing them. This was not an isolated incident. Other bodies had been found in similar locations, but none had drawn this level of fear. Now the reality was undeniable. A killer was at large, stalking the town with careful precision. The bayou, once a place of peace and solitude, had become a graveyard of mystery and terror. People began to realize that the danger wasn't somewhere else, it was here, hidden in the mist, watching, waiting, and ready to strike again. The fog thickened over the water as if the bayou itself was swallowing the secrets of the town, leaving only dread behind. Detectives returned to the bayou, determined to find patterns that could lead them to the person responsible. The more they examined the cases, the clearer it became that these were not random acts. Each victim shared subtle similarities: timing, location, and even the way the bodies were positioned suggested a methodical hand. It was as if the killer was sending a message through the placement of the bodies, a chilling signature that only someone with experience could recognize. Investigators pored over reports, re-interviewing witnesses and reviewing surveillance footage, searching for anything that could reveal a connection between the victims. The town's residents became painfully aware that the disappearances were not accidents or isolated incidents. Fear settled over homes and streets, and ordinary life became overshadowed by the possibility of danger. People stopped taking evening walks, canceled social plans, and scrutinized unfamiliar faces. Parents clutched their children, and friends became cautious about meeting in groups. The killer was no longer an abstract threat. He had become an invisible presence that could be anywhere, observing and waiting. The realization that he might be someone who lived among them made every neighbor a potential suspect, and suspicion poisoned the sense of community that had always defined the town. As investigators worked to connect the dots, they noticed patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. Certain areas near the bayou were repeatedly associated with missing persons, suggesting the killer had an intimate knowledge of the terrain. Detectives began mapping these locations, trying to anticipate where he might strike next. Forensic evidence, though limited, offered small breakthroughs: fibers, footprints, and minor details that could link one case to another. Every detail mattered, and even the smallest clue could be the difference between safety and tragedy. The pressure on law enforcement intensified as the bodies continued to appear. The town demanded answers, but the killer remained elusive, exploiting the shadows and the natural cover of the bayou. Each new discovery heightened the sense of urgency, while residents adjusted their lives to a new reality dominated by fear. The town's rhythm was forever altered, as the danger was no longer distant, it was close, immediate, and unpredictable. Investigators realized that to stop him, They needed to understand not just his methods, but his mind. The hunt was no longer just about finding a body. It was about predicting the next move of a predator who had mastered the art of hiding in plain sight. As the days turned into weeks, the town's fear began to seep into every corner of daily life. Streets that were once filled with children riding bikes and neighbors chatting now remained eerily empty after sunset. Business owners shuttered their doors earlier than usual, and even daytime routines were colored with caution. People glanced over their shoulders constantly, imagining threats lurking in the shadows. The bayou, with its still waters and hidden depths, had become a symbol of dread, a place no one wanted to approach. Every discovery of another body only heightened the tension, proving that the danger was not an isolated event, but a deliberate, calculated pattern. Parents clutched their children tightly, refusing to let them wander, even for a few minutes, while friends canceled plans and avoided social gatherings. The sense of community that had once defined the town was cracking under the weight of suspicion and fear. Everyone knew that the killer was out there, moving silently among them, blending into the normalcy of daily life. The idea that someone they might have seen every day could commit such acts without detection was nearly impossible to comprehend, yet impossible to ignore. The town's police force worked tirelessly, but each new discovery of a body reminded them how cunning and elusive the perpetrator was. Rumors spread like wildfire, some true, many exaggerated, each one adding to the paranoia. People spoke in whispers about what the victims might have done, who they had seen last, and where the killer could strike next. Even those who had once dismissed the missing persons as isolated cases began locking their doors and boarding up windows. The bayou itself seemed alive with menace, the mist curling over its waters like a curtain hiding secrets, its trees and reeds concealing threats that could strike without warning. Nighttime brought a particular terror. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across empty streets, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set hearts racing. Law enforcement increased patrols, but their presence offered little comfort. The residents realized that the killer was not just attacking bodies, but terrorizing minds, making everyone feel unsafe in the place they had always called home. Even as the sun rose each morning, bringing light to the town, the darkness of the bayou remained, a looming reminder that the threat was never far away. The town was no longer just a community, it had become a place defined by fear, each day a tense wait for the next horrifying discovery. Months passed, and the case seemed to stall, leaving investigators frustrated and the town gripped by unease. Each new lead brought more questions than answers, and for a time, hope seemed almost impossible to grasp. Then, unexpectedly, a breakthrough emerged. Forensic analysts discovered traces on one victim's clothing that had been overlooked in earlier examinations: tiny fibers, faint fingerprints, and the unusual pattern of bruising that suggested a signature method. While subtle, these details offered a thread of connection that could tie multiple cases together. Detectives began to see a pattern, something precise and calculated that pointed to a single perpetrator. Authorities widened their investigation, reviewing old reports, missing person files, and surveillance footage from local businesses near the bayou. One camera caught a figure moving near the water at odd hours, careful to avoid direct observation, but leaving subtle clues of his presence. The image was grainy, almost unidentifiable, yet it was enough to narrow the focus of the investigation. Detectives began constructing a timeline, mapping out the killer's movements and identifying areas where he might be familiar with the terrain. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that this was not a random attacker. He was someone who understood the town, the bayou, and its hidden paths, someone who could operate without drawing attention. With this new direction, the police shifted from reactive responses to proactive measures, setting up surveillance in key locations and interviewing those who fit the emerging profile. Each piece of evidence hinted at a meticulous mind behind the crimes, someone methodical, calculating, and willing to exploit the town's complacency. Patterns in the timing of the attacks suggested the killer's movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if he was following a personal schedule unknown to anyone else. Even as the investigation gained momentum, fear lingered. Townspeople could not forget the bayou's dark presence or the lives it had claimed. Each day brought anxiety, with residents wondering if the killer had already selected his next victim. Investigators worked tirelessly, piecing together every fragment of evidence, while the killer remained a shadow on the edges of the town, unseen, but felt. It was a tense balance of hope and dread, a struggle to bring light into the darkness that had taken root in their community. The breakthrough offered a glimmer of possibility, but it also reminded everyone that the danger had been close all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting to strike again. The arrest came like a thunderclap, shocking the entire town. Authorities moved in quietly, detaining a man who had lived among them without raising suspicion. On the surface, he seemed ordinary, quiet, polite, and unremarkable, but the evidence told a different story. Forensic findings, surveillance footage, and witness accounts finally converged, painting a chilling portrait of someone capable of committing the unthinkable. The discovery sent waves of relief through the community, but it did little to erase the fear that had settled into the town's consciousness. Families mourned the victims, struggling to process that someone they might have passed on the street every day had been responsible for so much horror. Even with the arrest, uncertainty lingered. Investigators worked tirelessly to confirm whether he had acted alone or if others had been involved, combing through records, searching for hidden connections, and questioning acquaintances. The man's calm demeanor during questioning made the revelations even more unsettling. Each piece of evidence revealed careful planning, control, and a disturbing familiarity with the bayou's hidden paths. His knowledge of the terrain, his ability to remain unseen, and the consistency of his methods all pointed to someone who had honed his ability to evade detection over time. The town, however, could not immediately return to normal. Streets remained quieter than before, and parents continued to keep a vigilant eye on their children. People learned to recognize subtle signs of danger, and conversations were often tinged with the lingering fear of what had occurred. The bayou, a place once associated with nature and solitude, had become a symbol of dread. Its misty waters and dense vegetation were reminders of lives lost and of the terror that had unfolded over months. Even after the man's capture, the water's surface reflected the town's collective anxiety, showing that while one chapter had closed, the emotional scars remained. The community faced the difficult task of reclaiming their sense of safety and trust, slowly rebuilding bonds fractured by fear and suspicion. Though justice was underway, the story of the Texas Bayou left an indelible mark. The killer's actions had forever altered the town, proving how quickly darkness could infiltrate ordinary life. Families learned to live with heightened awareness, and the memory of the victims served as a reminder of both vulnerability and resilience. Even as the legal process continued, the town knew that the bayou's shadow would linger in memory, a chilling testament to a killer who had once moved unseen among them, leaving only tragedy and fear in his wake.